But before we can talk about anything else, we've got to discuss news today that the government will spend $40 million advertising stage 3 tax cuts. So just to be clear, the government will spend our money to tell us they are giving us our money. We've been told that tax cuts were needed. We've been told they were absolutely the right thing to do. We've been told they were overwhelmingly popular. So why the need to spend our money just to tell us they're going to give us our money? Anthony Albanese, after all, said he'd been out and about speaking to, like actual people.
We involved someone else as well, or another group of people, ordinary Aussies in supermarkets. I spoke with people, as I do, in shopping centres, around streets, in shops.
So Anthony Albanese had spoken to people, Caleb, in streets. And have you ever thought a politician was telling lies more than at that moment? I've spoken to actual people, and then you had to think, have I ever met an actual person?
Well, I know, and remember we tested this, right? You actually went out and spoke to people on the street to see whether Albanese had spoken to them, and you ran into this woman.
What do you think of Anthony Albanese's tax cuts announced today?
I don't know. I don't know who that is.
You don't know who Anthony Albanese is?
I don't watch the news.
He's the Prime Minister.
What?
And there, perhaps, is the argument for all this $40 million they've got to spend on the ads, because clearly Albanese hadn't spoken to her and she got no idea who the bloke is. I can't get over the hide of the government here, though. Let's be honest, right? There's been so much publicity in the media and, sure, it's not all been great publicity. We've been talking about it most nights for weeks. It's been in the newspapers for weeks. If you don't already know you're going to get some kind of tax cut, you're probably not even going to notice the ad to begin with because you haven't been watching television. Now, we should note that the Coalition did run ads as well when they had their stage 1 and 2 of the tax cuts. They apparently spent about $20 million on both of those campaigns combined. So I'm buggered if I know how they're going to come to $40 million on this
inflation.
campaign.
Inflation. It just costs more now, Caleb. OK, you're not getting the same bang for your buck. But how is this business model? We literally pay for our own propaganda. Like, please brainwash me. Please tell me all the ways in which you are so incredibly wonderful. And funnily enough, everything that you want to do is what's best for me as well. Whatever suits your agenda, please spend my money on explaining that to me any way you like. Paul Murray pointed out earlier tonight that when they were selling the NBN to us, that cost 20 mil. And we all know, well, I'm still not a fan of the NBN. When the Optus network went down recently and the Optus chief tweeted to everyone, get on the Optus app, there's live updates happening. Well, if Turnbull and Rudd hadn't ripped out the copper that we used to have as backup, we would have been able to do that. But the Optus network was down, so this thing's not infallible, and always pay attention to how they are making you more helpless and more dependent on these systems that aren't fail-proof. Then there was the Gonski reforms. We all know how well that's going. The Grattan Institute came out this week and said 1 in 3 kids can't read and write out of 4 million Aussie school kids. That didn't stop them from spending $15 million on telling the Australian people how great the Gonski reforms were going to be. Then, of course, there was the carbon tax, and they had to sell that to Australians. Spent a paltry $12 million. It actually seems so small. But I think it's important to remind ourselves that 40 million, I mean, what kind of campaign requires 40 million? And if you're selling a good product, you simply don't have to sell it that hard. We already know through the polls that this has been wildly popular. Newspoll, which is like the pin-up of all polls in Australia, said two-thirds of Australians like this. You're doing well. Thumbs up, bro. So why do you have to spend 40 million?
As you said, it should sell itself. But back to that girl that we interviewed who didn't know who Anthony Albanese was. And then when I said he's the Prime Minister and she said, What? Most Australians feel like that every single day when we realise Anthony Albanese
When
is the
did that
Prime Minister.
happen?
But they really should tighten the rules on this because, this is essentially like party political advertising under the guise of, well, we have to tell people about this brand new policy, right? I mean, if the Labor Party wants to spend its own money advertising this stuff, that's their business. They're well within their rights to, because they're essentially getting ready for the next election campaign. And we all know that this was linked to the by-election in Dunkley anyway. It is an election campaign measure. Then they go and use our money, tax money, to promote it. It was like Anastasia Palaszczuk, just weeks before she resigned as Premier in Queensland, put out this video talking about how great she is and, I'm here sticking by you. That was a taxpayer-funded video, but it was
actually
clearly...
largely about how much you guys love me.
I know.
You love me. You come up to me in the street, you tell me...
But do you remember during the pandemic, and they had planes flying across Brisbane dragging signs saying, "We are safe because she is strong." I mean, now I think the Labor Party paid for that. That wasn't taxpayer money. But essentially, under the guise of advertising the tax cuts, they're really just advertising themselves.
Oh, completely and utterly. That is, and we're paying for it. Please, convince us with our own money.
It's enough to make you sick.